Hi, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us at today's webinar, hosted by our founder and product manager, Piotr Kononow. The subject of today's webinar is how to build a data dictionary. Please remember, you have any questions, there's a question tab on the right side of the window. Please put your questions there. At the end of the webinar, we'll try to answer all the questions you asked. So sit back, relax, and enjoy webinar by Piotr. Going to you.
Thanks, Tom. Hello, everyone. So today's topic is on how to build a data dictionary. First, I will cover some theory. I will talk about data dictionaries, what they are. Maybe not everyone understands the concept. So I'll show you a couple of things that you should know about data dictionaries. And then I will show you a practical how to guide how you can build and maintain data dictionary with our product, with Dataedo. Okay, so let's get into the presentation. So let's start with the most obvious question: what actually is a data dictionary? So data dictionary is a specification of tables in a specific database, in a specific data source. It consists mostly of the list of tables or data sets or files and list of data fields or columns with all of their attributes. And sometimes metadata is, data dictionary is also referred to as technical metadata. So data about data, and it's technical because it refers to technical assets and not the business assets, like for instance, business glossary. Sample data dictionary entry could look like this. This is a screen from Dataedo. What you can see here, this is actually a specification of a specific table. You have a table name over here. You have a database it is part of. You have schema. You have the description of the table, what it is for, what it holds. Then you have a list of columns with the specification of each one. So you have a name, you have a data type, you have some attributes like identity, nullability. You have links, relationships to other tables. In this case, this is a foreign key to a table called state province. And you have descriptions of every column. This is just an example. You could imagine many different fields. So yeah, but the general structure is almost the same. Is just a list of fields with additional descriptive metadata and fields. Let me talk more about those descriptive fields, those elements. So I discussed that the key elements are the list of tables and columns. And you have other technical attributes like the data type. You can also include constraints, technical constraints on the data, so primary unique keys, constraints like, for instance, column can hold only just a couple of specified values. You can include the relationships between other tables, like in foreign keys, or how to join those tables in an SQL query. You can hold a default values and allowed values. So these are mostly technical. They are maintained and managed by a system, but you could also add an additional more logical attributes, such as comments. You could indicate the status of the data element. You could add classification, so sensitivity information, like for instance, if it's a sensitive data or non-sensitive. You could indicate ownership, so and other roles like, I don't know, maybe steward or architect, so who designed the table, who's responsible for it. You could indicate also the sources, so where does the data come from, and so on and so forth. There's a number of things you could add. It all depends on the purpose of the data dictionary. Okay, let me tell you why we should talk about data dictionary. Why should you care, and why should you actually build one? So the obvious one, maybe it's not obvious, but it's a specification of data you have And that helps you actually know what data you have and find the data. Imagine you're trying to do a report on customer orders. So where do you go actually? So do you go to CRM? Do you go to data warehouse? Do you go to e-commerce database? It's hard to tell. You have to talk to people. But if you have a data dictionary, this is actually a specification of this data is somewhere within our organization, and actually it points you exactly to what databases, what tables, what columns you should look into. Another thing is to understand the data. Let's imagine you actually found the table and column, and you don't really understand what does the data mean? I mean, you have a couple of columns you understand, let's say orders table, and there are some columns that have absolutely no meaning to you, some fields, and you don't know how to query the table, how to join it with other tables. Where does the data come from? What's the quality? Is it still being used? So there's a lot of questions you have about data if you look at it. So just by looking at tables and columns and the specific data, it doesn't always tell you much. Most columns are not clear in my experience. So just a couple of those are obvious, and most of them are not. Another benefit of the data dictionary is that this is a place you can actually capture and store the knowledge of in your own organization, something you've learned, something your team members have learned, and also then share it with other people. So let's say you have somebody who spent a lot of time digging through a database. So data dictionary is a place they actually note down what they've learned, and then they can share it with other people who do reporting, analytics, and so on. That way, this is a communication tool about your data. There are two types, in general, there are two types of data dictionaries. They're so-called passive and active. Active is a very specific type of data dictionary. Active data dictionary is something held inside a database. As you can see here, we have a DBMS, we have some SQL Server databases, any relational database have the same construction in case of data dictionary. So you have a database, you have your databases that keep the actual data. So here, let's say this is a CRM and it has a orders table. There's also a special place, a special set of views or tables or a schema that stores the data dictionary. So a specification of the data stored here. This database is always, in the case of relational databases, it's always accessible. You can always query it. And the distinction between any other data dictionary is that it's always up to date. It's always in sync with the data. You cannot go into the database, change add a column so that it's not in the active data dictionary. Sorry. It's always up to date. And that's not the case in case of passive data dictionary, which is any kind of data dictionary. I'll tell you more about tools, but let's say you have a tool like Dataedo that scans your data bases, metadata, allows you to build it. Actually, you need to the tool itself needs to do some effort, some action to actually get the data in sync, while the database engine doesn't allow to get these two out of sync. Okay, let's move on. You probably heard about the data dictionary. If you're working with databases, if you're running any queries, you probably have heard it under very different names. So every vendor has their own names for the same actual idea for the active data dictionary. So you can call it system catalog, views or tables. You can call it system tables or views or catalog views. It's also common to call it information schema. It's actually an ISO standard. Or that could be data dictionary views or tables. So you could hear about this and use it without even knowing that you were using data dictionary. So the data dictionary is basically a set of predefined tables and views that are present in all the databases by default. So this is an example from SQL Server. You have a list of views that hold list of tables, columns, views, and so on. There's like 50 of these kind of tables or views. You can query it. That's something I mentioned before. You can write a query to see what tables and columns we have. That's a very useful feature. Actually, if you go to this link on our website, you can see a database of a couple hundred of queries, predefined queries we have built and shared. So you can query your database to different engines, SQL Server, MySQL, Oracle, and so on. So you can actually analyze the metadata and the data in your database. Another thing to be aware of is that the different platforms manage data dictionary in a different way. So the most advanced are the oldest ones, actually. So the relational databases and the data warehouses. So the data dictionary is a integral part of the database. That's something I mentioned before, the active data dictionary, and it's easily accessible. So it's very easy to find the data you have. And the more modern platform, the less obvious it is. It has a reason. The reason is that it comes with the cost. So managing the schema, it has a cost of the design. You need to design relational databases, and also the cost of maintaining it. So the server needs to do some work actually to make it work. If you talk about databases like MongoDB, for instance, they treat the schema they're very liberal in terms of schema. You can put almost anything inside. That gives them an advantage of handling vast amounts of data. But the disadvantage is that it's not that easy to find out what fields you have. In case of MongoDB, the standard way is that you need to get a few documents and look into them. So they have a structure, but they are embedded in the data itself rather than the schema of the data of the database. And in terms of, in case of data lakes, there's sometimes some of them are called data swamps because you can put anything in any structure you like. There are just file storages. There are some mechanisms, there are some tools to manage this, but in general, data lakes are basically storage engines. They can process huge amounts of data, but at a cost, right? You do not know what you have. You have to find those files. It's up to you to make sure it makes sense. You need to actually store the documentation or the data dictionary and manage it on your own. So they do not provide by default any metadata management. Here I'd like to show you that the data dictionary concept is it's just a concept. So it's not a specific tool. It's not a specific asset you can actually look at. Data dictionary is a specification of data, and as such, it can exist on very different levels and phases of the lifetime of any system. So you can find data dictionary in data modeling tools. You can find data dictionary in documents, in specification documents. You can find it in database, like in this case. You can find it in some documentation of physical databases exported somewhere to Excel or HTML. You can find it in other metadata tools like data catalogs or metadata management tools. So it's not that just one repository in any organization. It has a lifetime. So this is an extension of the previous slide. So if you would like to know about the data you have, you could look into more than just one place, not just the database. You could actually have a look at the design documents, spreadsheets, anything that was created before the implementation of the system. That can tell you something about the data you have. So what ideas about the data you should be processing had people who were actually designing and modeling the system. You could also look at the modeling tools, right? So somebody used maybe a data modeling tool and they used some naming that could be different than a database that also useful insights. You could look at the database, as I shown you before. You could try to look for some kind of documentation that sometimes is delivered to the system in PDF or HTML or somewhere online on the vendor page. You can look into the metadata tools like data catalogs, data dictionary tools like Dataedo, or any other metadata repositories. It can be also found in some ETL tools who need to be aware of the structure of the data. So there are many places you can actually look into to get some insight about the data you have, not just the database itself or the files in the data lake. Here are some types of tools, some classes of tools you can use to build this passive data dictionary, because I think I would like to encourage you to have one place where you describe all your data. This is why we built Dataedo. So it falls into this category, or also maybe a data catalog. So I would advise to merge all that knowledge you found in all the previous stages, or in all the places in the organization, all the systems, all the documents, and all the people actually who know the data, and put it into one place. Here are some tools. You can use a spreadsheet or word processor. It's very easy. It's easy, to implement, but a nightmare to maintain or actually do any collaboration on that. You can also use database comments in a database engine itself, but the metadata is with the data actually, but it's not the best. It's not the best place to store it, in my opinion. It's very limited. So yeah, I would advise to have an external repository. You can use also modeling tools, but they were not designed for that. They are mostly focused on the visual aspect, on the modeling rather than the maintenance, and they do not provide a comprehensive way of actually documenting every detail. And so yeah, they're quite old school. There's a category of tools that Dataedo falls into. And there is this new category of tools called data catalogs, which are used to help analysts and people doing all the reporting and querying, help easily find the data. Okay, so that was my introduction about the theory of the data dictionary. Now I'd like to show you how you can actually get Dataedo, connect to your databases, like in this case, and build a nice data dictionary with original knowledge, with a nice presentation of this information and sharing to all the people. It doesn't look like this book is just an icon. I'll show you in a second. Okay, so that was the PowerPoint presentation. Let's move on to live program. Okay, so this is a program. This is the user interface for the people doing the documentation, so the technical users. And here we have a exported documentation, which is easily accessible to all the people. So let's say I want to find customer data, right? So I can do a lookup. I found some tables. I see the specification, right? So it's a tool for me to find the data and make sense out of it, right? I can see some diagrams to help me understand the bigger picture, right? I have something called modules. We'll talk about this in a minute. So this is just a grouping of a list of tables and a diagram and some descriptions. Okay, so I have a number of topics I'd like to show you, a number of steps, number of things you could follow to build a data dictionary that would actually make people's lives easier, people who would like to work with databases, who would like to know where the data is, what it means, and so on. Okay, so let's start with the architecture. So it's all based on the repository. Repository is a metadata repository that holds all the information. So it's this passive data dictionary where you keep all the technical metadata, all the descriptions, all those things you'd like to capture, all the knowledge. Okay, so this is what we see here. These elements are databases, so they are connections to a database. I'll show you in a second how to add a table, how to add a data source. And this is a business glossary. Business glossary is a list of business terms. So it's a business metadata. So this is technical, this is business. So this is just a specification of our concept in the organization. Okay, so assuming you got your repository set up, I'm not going to get into the details of how to do it right now. It's quite easy. There are two options. One is the file. The other one is SQL Server database. This is the recommended version. It's much more easy to collaborate, to work as a team. So, okay, I have set up the repository and I need to add data source. So I go into add database connection. I need to choose an engine. If you do not see your database here, you can use a generic ODBC connector. You need to have an ODBC driver installed on your in your system with some configuration. We have a technical documentation that it's not that difficult. This list will grow. Right now, there are maybe 15 elements. We would like to add a lot more in the near future. Here I have a predefined connection, so let me just jump in and load the predefined database. So it quickly scanned. If you have a large database, it will take quite a little more. So I have a overview of what tables and other assets were found. So I just click import, and it's being read and imported to the repository. So right now I have a list of tables. I can see the structure, right? This one makes more sense, like something, all those fields I have just shown you. Okay, so yeah, it's as easy as that. You just add the connection details, hit import, wait for the data to be imported, and you have all the basic information extracted from the database. It's ready to be shared. Right now, you need to capture more insights, more knowledge into the repository. So this is where the actual value comes from. So first thing we can do is to add the descriptions. So the most obvious step, I will help myself adding the so-called documentation progress, and I can see right now that only this table is being described. Actually, yeah, it doesn't make much sense. And this one has some descriptions, but most of them are zero. So my goal right now is to provide a meaningful description for all the tables and columns. So the way you do it, you just go through the list. You see those the progress, right? You can go into and say, okay, this is the row ID. Some of the descriptions will be obvious, right? So you can just go ahead and write an easy, obvious description, but you should always ask what's not obvious about it. So in this case, the end date. Does end date can it be null, for instance? If it's null, what does it mean to the salary? So does it mean that so what actually end date means, or the lack of it? So you should ask these kind of questions to provide actually more than just a name to anyone who would like to use the data. You could use something we called hints, suggestions. Those blue dots indicate that there are some suggestions to the field. So in this case, we have a start date in different tables with the description field. So we just check those description and suggest you use one of these. So if you are documenting tables, columns that are very common, like for instance creation date, right? It's almost always the same, right? Creation date or ID, right? In the case of ID, it's just row ID. So I can see that 10 tables have the row ID description. I could reuse it, right? So I do not have to do all the work. Also, I could find all the columns at once, right? And see, okay, so I could copy this one also to the other ones, to save a lot of work, right? Manual work. Okay, so let's when I save, let's just it's not a discount, right? Okay, so let's say the obvious one, start date. Do not avoid these kind of descriptions because it does provide no value. So start day of actually first day of new salary, right? Okay, that makes more sense right now, and you can see that the percentage grows, right? So actually it helps me find what I need to do in terms of commenting. So assuming the database is much larger than this one, I could group those columns into those tables into modules, which I will tell you a little more in a minute. And that way I can focus on, so they are here. So let's say I'm responsible for human resources, and right now I can see, okay, my job is done. Okay, maybe not for views, right? So I need to focus on views. So it's an easy way to break down the task, assign it to different people. Another thing, and title or alias. So we call it title. It's an alias to the object. So let's say start date is misleading name. It's a standard column which we use for something else, right? Let's use it. I don't know, raise date, right? So start ID is not in this case maybe not misleading, but sometimes it's very confusing. The meaning change, or it was used by a packaged system. So we use it in a different way. So when you go to the documentation, you can see, let me check if we have. So if you go to the data dictionary, you can see that those objects, tables and columns have a title also included in a brackets. That way you can see the physical name if you're doing reporting, if you're querying the database, and then you can actually see what it actually means. So what the data is. That helps a lot in making sense of what you're looking at. Okay, so you can also fill this information. You can also add a number of different fields, up to 100. So you can add fields like status, right? You can define what list you have. You can add a field for ownership, right? You can write, I don't know, say Jack, right? So Jack will be added to the list. You can add many more information like source table or steward or classification of sensitive data. So as I said, the sky is the limit. So it's all up to the purposes of the data dictionary, what you would like to be tracking, what information will be useful for people to work with the data. Okay, another thing are the primary and unique keys. So in this case, you can see that ID is actually a unique key for this table. You can see it probably here. Yeah. So we know that this column, because this information comes from the database, but let's say the customer name should also be unique, and it's not defined as unique in the system. We can actually create a something we call manual key. So let's say this column is a unique key, right? And let's give it a description, say that customer name needs to be unique. So it's not something enforced by the system or database itself, but it's some logical rule and assumption about the database. This is particularly useful in terms of views. Do we have a view over here? In terms of views, because these are almost none of the engine supports this kind of information. So if you have created a view and your assumption is that in this case, I don't know, job candidate is unique. So if somebody wants to reuse it, that's the way to communicate that they can use it and that rows will not be duplicated, because if you do a join, SQL join, you would mess up with the results, right? So this kind of information is useful, very, very useful for reusing of the view. Another important piece of information is a foreign key or relationship or join. So this is a foreign key. So this is an indication that the column is a foreign key to some other table or view. So this information mostly comes from the database. So database has something called foreign key constraints. So this one, you can see it on the relationships tab. So this one is actually, it has a name somewhere, or maybe, oh, here's the name. So this is a physical name in a database. So it's a technical constraint built in the database. So an architect actually went and enforced that that information. But most of the databases do not have it. So we did analytics, and I think only 25% of the databases have these. And even if they do, it's not a must-have. The database will work anyway, and if you do not have this, then it's not obvious how to join the tables. I also checked that most of the applications, ERP or CRM applications, they do not have it. There's a number of reasons why then they do not. I have an article about this on our blog. So without this, when you look at the table, and let's find some more meaningful example. Let's say product, right? Okay, let's say size unit measure code. Right now we have information that it has a lookup table, right? So I can actually check the list of available values and probably the labels in this table. But let's say this information was not here, or a size, right? Does size come from some kind of lookup, or is it a freehand text? We do not know, and it's this information is very useful. It's necessary if you want to do reporting. So let's say this actually is a lookup table, and we know about it because I've spent like half a day trying to find it, and I analyzed existing reports or talk to people, and I want to make it much easier for new guys coming in and doing query from the same table. So what I do, I go right click and I choose add relation, and I can choose the table or view that is also important, that you can actually indicate that the lookup is something else than a table. It could be a view. You can also choose an object from another database. So let's say, okay, this database does not enforce that. We don't have this information, but we have it in some, I don't know, data lake or something, or data warehouse or something else. We can also create tables manually. More on that later. Yes, I can choose another database. I can choose a table, and I can specify what tables, what columns, how should I join the columns. So when I save it, this information, I need to go here and back. So I can see that this table has a lookup. I could define more than one. I can go to the columns table, and I can see it on the list of relationships. So that way, it's very it's much easier for everyone else to do the joins, which takes a lot of time to reverse engineer the information. And if you do it wrong, you can get incorrect results if you do incorrect assumptions about the joins. So once I have it, I can go into something we call module. More on that in a second. Let's create a new one. And I can go to ERD tab, and let's say that was what was that? Product table. I can add it. So right now it suggests me all the tables that I could actually join it with. I think maybe here as well. So if I add related tables, yeah, 19. That's quite a table. So yeah, let's maybe delete that. So I can see probably. I'm not sure which one that was. I linked it with, but I should be able to see it over here. And yeah, when I added the relationship is also included in the diagram. I could also find the table here and do the same logic from the diagram perspective. No, sorry, no, that's this one. So add relations are here. So I could do the same thing. So there are two ways of doing the same information. So I can actually have it in tabular mode, like in data dictionary, and I can visualize it with ER diagrams. Okay, more on modules. Modules are a very useful tool to organize large database. So I showed you a table that has maybe 15 tables. Yeah, that doesn't happen in real life. That it's more like here, where you have maybe close to I don't know, 100, maybe 50, and there are databases that have couple thousand tables. So that way, that's kind of confusing. And what we did was to introduce something called modules, and modules are those folders. Those folders you can actually group tables into and other objects, and you can do it from tabular view as well. So you can go through the list and see, okay, these tables from this schema or this prefix, right? I can group them into my new module. As you can see, you can have many-to-many relationships, which is also very useful. So those folders can represent a module in an application. That could be a report, that could be some functionality or something that would make sense to you. You can also, for each module, you can you can add a long description. You can paste them images, you can paste your documents actually, and that way this would be, so you'll have a list of objects, you will have a description and diagram, and you can paste some other diagrams and images as well. Okay. Another thing is a data classification. So our tool has a module that helps you find sensitive information, and we have two predefined functions. There are other way on the way, and there you can also configure and build your own. That takes a little effort, but it's not that complicated. So let's hit GDPR. I think I already used that. So we scan the database. Yeah, actually, I didn't. So we scan the database and we look at the column. We have a list of predefined name patterns, which we think could be sensitive information. So we suggest you the level of sensitivity for a specific regulation, like GDPR. We have personal data and sensitive personal data. And we also suggest the type of the information. So if I click save, this information is saved. Let's not do it right now. If I go to columns, you can see this information being added as another field. right? I can edit this information if I do not agree with this. I can actually curate the information, right? So I can say this is non-personal data. Yeah, and so on. So that way I have a specification of all the sensitive information. I can list all the fields I have in all my databases actually in one place. So I have a table, I have a column, I have the database, and yeah, the level of sensitivity plus the type of the information. So we call it domain. Yeah, you can export to Excel, and there you have a specification of all the sensitive information. Okay, let me also show you how we manage change. This is very important. So right now I'm getting into the table. The tables and database I have imported on the beginning. So I added some changes, and when I click import changes right now, I hope. Yeah, so right now you can see that the one table was created and one was updated, and we'll see in a second. It also detected, right? Okay, so if I hit the generate button, I can see one change, and that was test2 table, and I have added a column called test2. Okay, I'm not too inventive right now, but yeah, you can see the actual attributes. And if I change the data type, for instance, right, let's do it once again, and let's hit that button once again. We should be seeing two entries, right? So first one, first I have added column, and right now I have updated. And if I click, I can see that I have changed the nchar to integer. So you can see that applying changes to your passive data dictionary that way is very simple. Imagine the same thing done with Excel. That would be a nightmare. That would be not be possible at all. That's why you need a tool. You can do initial data dictionary in Excel, but once the data is actually live, that's a nightmare. That's impossible. Yeah, I wouldn't like to be the guy responsible for this task. And with Dataedo, you can do it with one click. You can schedule this task, and then you can actually report the changes on the level of table or database as well, on the level of database and a specific table. Okay, and the last thing. So once you have done all that, or even before, you click the export button. You choose the template and the format. The advised one is HTML. If you have a business glossary, then this one. And what you get as the result is something I showed before, and that is this nice document which gives you navigation, search, and that you can share it with the using any web server. You can share it on the local disk or on a shared folder, and yeah, allow your analysts, developers, and anyone to actually boost their work with databases from day one actually. Okay, I think that was quite a lot of information in one sitting. I showed you the key features of the data dictionary we have. So I think that's all for my presentation, and I can now take questions.
So now's the time for a question and answer session. We have quite a few already, so I'll start with those. Yes, the webinar recording will be available after we finished here, so don't you worry about that. Piotr, does Dataedo support NoSQL DBs at this moment?
Not really. I didn't show you the manual documentation, right? It was anyway quite a long presentation, so you can also do it manually. And we do not, at the moment, support NoSQL. I mentioned MongoDB, but we are working on it, and we are working on an online portal which will include the documents which are not only in tabular form, because what I've shown you right now are just flat tables, but we will support data like JSON or XML as well. And so that's on the way. Currently, you could do it with manual entry. It could be quite difficult using the dots indicating the level of the data field.
Okay, thank you. Dawn has a great question. We are going to be undertaking a cleanup and unused objects in our SQL database next quarter. What is the best way to leverage Dataedo to help identify those objects?
Okay, that is a good question. That's a good case. What you could do is to use for instance, the status field, or to indicate if the object is being used. Dataedo will not tell you by itself how is it used or where or when. You need to do research on your own, but Dataedo will bridge the gap of it will store the information for the project and for the future, right? I do not advise dropping tables actually, but you can you can do following things. You can create modules and assign tables to those objects to indicate what is this used by. So that way you'll actually, once you figure out it's used by the report or this form or this application, you just assign it. You know that it's used. Another thing you can do is to create a owner to actually assign ownership of the objects. That way you have a responsibility on on specific tables. So use custom field to indicate the ownership the same way I have somewhere here when I showed you before. And you could use also a status field indicating the status of the usage, and include also the status called unknown, which will indicate that you checked, you tried to figure out, but you do not know that. So I think that's how you could use it.
Thank you. Utsaf asked if you can check and not check nullable when you show the columns in Dataedo. Is it possible to do it in the tool, or you need to do it in the source and then update the tool?
That's a good question. So that relates to profiling, right? Currently, you would need to run a query on your own. In future, we'd like to add some it's called profiling or data discovery. So where you actually click, some tools have that. So when you click on the column, and the tool can do some basic profiling, finding if there are null values or what's the distribution of values. We do not currently have that. That's on the roadmap, but on the long-term roadmap. So you would need to do research on your own.
Okay, thanks. And Kevin is asking if there's any underlying database where the custom metadata is stored.
Yes. It is based on SQL Server database. So let me show the tool. So this is stored in SQL database. It is being documented. You can do your own reports, and all those fields you can see here. They are basically columns, and it's easy to find them. So if you want to access the metadata, you can just write your own query. We can help you if you need.
Thanks. And Andreas is asking, is there a workflow functionality available to manage maintenance of the data dictionary by various data owners?
Okay. Different. Yeah, so you can. I think you could use the owner field, right? So let's say I assign owners. That way you can see who owns the object, or even column. And I think that could. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that's a starting point. You could also do the same for modules. So you could assign owners for modules. I hope that that's the answer.
Thank you again. Do you have any other questions? There's one from Eric, but it's hard for me to ask them. So we'll reply to you in the email after the webinar because there's some code there. But if you have any other questions, just feel free to ask them now. Okay, I'll just 1 minute for somebody to.
You can also ask questions answering to the email you received to invitation to the webinar and not reminder, and you'll get an email right after it. So if you have any questions, you can also write us.
All right, there's a great question from Kelly. How important is data dictionary when heading into a new system project?
That's a good question. Into new system project, it depends. If it's a migration, then I think it's very, very important. If a new project is replacing something old, then you need to do a migration, and that way you need to understand the source database, source metadata, and the destination, and that way is very important. In this case, is very important. And if it is something completely new, then it is as important as any data source. So assuming you would like to get some insights from the data captured by this system, and I do not know any case where the answer is no, but you have a data, you want to use it, right? You want to get insights from it, you want to actually measure something, get smarter every day. So if you don't do it, if let's say actually it's the best time to do it, because you have the developers, the consultants, and everyone involved. They actually know what they did, right? So that's the best time to document it. It's much more difficult when those people are gone and you need to figure out the data yourself. So yeah, I would say pretty important. And to be honest, from my experience, it's very overlooked step. So the business is always happy when they get functionalities, and they do not ask the questions like, would we be able to use the data for analytics like next month? That's an overlooked step, and that's what we advocate for.
Thanks, and since we're closing in to 1 hour, this is just one final question from Kevin. Okay. It looks like there is a central publisher for the data dictionary. Is there any way to open up who can update the data descriptions update so more people can easily contribute?
That's a good question, actually. So yeah, if you have a small environment, then one project, it's not that important. And currently we do not have this. It's so like permission based editing. This is something we would introduce in the portal I talked about. It will be sometime early next year. And currently all the people who have access with this desktop to the repository can actually edit it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for joining in. It was a pleasure to see you all, and we hope to see you next time on our other webinars. Thank you.
Thank you all.